morning again. I am going to be more purposefully adding in some commentary here about that involves more spiritual warfare kind of stuff. As I get into that, I wanted to encourage some thoughts here. So first, I wanted to 2 points or two concepts and then a point. The idea of a sense of humor. Have you ever thought about the phrase sense of humor? Like when somebody says you have a good sense of humor, or somebody says you don't have any sense of humor. Um, if you really stop to think about that phrase, you're just talking about someone's ability to sense the humor in a situation. And I never really stopped to think about that too much until thinking through this idea. And so people who tend to have a good sense of humor, it means, to most of us, it means that they tend to take things well and kind of absorb it and turn it into something humorous that the rest of us don't necessarily think to see or to do, and it's enjoyable and it's a gift for a lot of us who find a lot of relief in humor. But that's one idea. A second idea, maternal instinct. um, when I first had Mabel, my first one, um, I could feel within me a definite maternal instinct that was there. Um, but I felt very clunky in my use and kind of ability, my maternal abilities. So, one example that I often use of this is when she would be crying and she was in her crib. Uh, so, I have a pretty high tolerance for crying, and so I had I would sit there and watch her cry and try to figure out what it was that was the problem. And I had been reading books that kind of spoke into this, and so books that were guiding me. And so if I knew she wasn't hungry because she had just been nursed, if I knew she wasn't in pain because nothing was pinching her or anything like that, if I knew that everything around her was safe and good, and everything that I'd solved every situation that I had or that I could, then I would decide that the reason she was crying was because she was overtired and really just needed a nap. So this was in a situation where I would sit there and try to figure it out, sort it out while watching her cry. And if I knew that everything else was fine and that she was still crying, then I would go, okay, I think this is just a fussy cry because she's tired. And I would go ahead and leave the room after, I darkened it, turned on a white noise machine and things like that. And then I would let her cry for about 5 minutes. And I usually set the timer for 5 minutes because listening to a baby cry for 5 minutes can be, that 5 minutes can feel really, really long. And so I would set the timer and I would not go in there for 5 minutes. And so many times she was out by the end of the 5 minutes, and sometimes it would be like within seconds of the end of the 5 minutes she would just be out. Over time, I got the hang of, I finally started being able to hear the difference of the cries. It took me a while to figure out, what a hungry cry is, what a I'm in pain cry is, and that kind of thing. And so that's how I sorted it out, was kind of methodically trying to evaluate and put these things together. And over time, got just like second nature. It became second nature, but it took practice and it took trial and error trying to sort that out. To me, that has been instructive spiritually, because the idea of we have a certain instinct within us, we have a certain nature within us, especially when we are born again. God puts His Holy Spirit within us, and so we know we have certain abilities because we're connected to the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit of God. We have certain abilities, but if we don't put those abilities into practice, then we just don't know how to use them. And so it's a matter of trial and error, trying to figure out certain things. Spiritually speaking, we have, we have, Jesus says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Um, Comments about having eyes to see, things like that. I've heard people say that the same senses that we have physically, we have spiritually, and that there's scriptural backup for that. I haven't even sorted that out myself, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that that was true, because those of us who experience having the Holy Spirit within us, that is, those of us who are Christians, we know we can sense these things and experience things differently than the other people around us. So we know we have that difference of experience, but if we don't put some of that into practice, then we just don't have that practice. So I wanted to kind of set that as a basis or a standard for what comments that I'll be making about spiritual warfare. There's a lot of stuff in spiritual warfare that simply is a matter of practice and experience. And I'm not talking about weird, wacko stuff. I'm talking about just getting the hang of things that God already tells us and things that we can sense and understand that we just don't even realize sometimes because we haven't put it into practice. So that's it.